And for Lutherans, that's not always a change. I know we can get settled into our ways, but we're also a church of the Reformation, which means we can be always reforming. So many of our churches have online worship services now, and that is new. And think of the Exodus reading today. When the Israelites are led from slavery into freedom, it is a reformation for them. It's a new way of being with God and being together. And in our Lutheran context, it was revelatory for me to see the commandments that way. I grew up kind of skipping, like I knew the 10 Commandments, but I would go over them quickly because I was told that Jesus' story is so good and it means so much freedom that Exodus 20 is like an old set of laws, and there is a new way to be. Let's focus on that. Now, mysteriously, I do think that's true. But I also learned something in being with Lutherans and thinking theologically about the 10 Commandments. So, for instance, Luther preached a sermon that was called How Christians Should Regard Moses. And one of his points is, and this is evidenced by how he starts the small catechism because it begins with a meditation on the 10 Commandments. One of his points is, these are helpful values for life together. They are part of the natural law of the universe, and they are like a mirror that we hold up to ourselves or we hold up to culture, and we ask the question, how can I live a virtuous life? Now, one of his key interpretations was, those laws don't mean our salvation, but they mean practical living, because the laws are pointing to a God who is trustworthy and full of love and full of relationship and connection. Giving these laws for a good life, but not saying that's how you'll find your salvation. Instead, salvation is found in trusting God who gives it and asking God, turn my life to bear fruit like these laws might say. Help me live in a right way in my new freedom. So there's a retelling of it. One of the early books given to me was Manna and Mercy, written by Daniel Erlander. When I was hanging around Lutherans, this is one of the early books. He's up in Washington and wrote this. And he writes books for youth that are going through learning together and adults that are new. And Manna and Mercy is basically, well, the tagline is, a brief history of God's unfolding promise to mend the entire universe. And I'll just tell you right now, yeah, it's 90 pages, so it's brief. It's brief enough. So on page 11, Zoom folks at home, is the giving of the 10 Commandments. And Daniel's interpretation is this. He has it on the 2 tablets here. That God is saying, dear partners, I chose you and liberated you, therefore you will trust only me. You will bring honor to my name, and you will keep the Sabbath holy. And on the bottom of the first tablet it says, parentheses, continued on next tablet. The next tablet. And when you are tempted to follow the ways of Egypt or the way of the people around you, you will refuse. You will honor your parents. You will not kill. You will not run after another's spouse. You will not steal or deceive. And you will not covet your neighbor's manna. Love God. Now, manna is, the gift they're given to sustain them in the desert. But it's also a metaphor in this book for God's giving gifts that sustain us ongoing. So Daniel keeps returning to, don't mess with God's manna, the gifts we're given. So it was clear to me when I started hanging around Lutherans, there's something more about the 10 Commandments than me just saying that's an old way to be. And I just want to banter with you about that today, because a lot of us, or some of us, grow up thinking this is a long list of do not do this kind of things. But Lutherans have been reading them as helpful instructions for life. It was how Jewish people were interpreting the commandments. They're broad, they expand, and Luther was interpreting that way too. So for instance, it's not just do not take the Lord's name in vain, but it is call on God's name. in all your need and all your prayers, lift your voice in that way. And it's not just do not murder, which as a youth I always thought, I'm good. I'm 1 of 10 already. I don't see myself doing that. This is easy. I'm going to get through this list. But it's not just that. It's value life. Lift up life. Think of the good life for your neighbor and live in ways that support their life's needs. Okay, it's not just do not bear false witness against your neighbor, but it's also defend people, speak well of them, interpret what they say in the best possible light. All of this was flourishing encouragement for life and what I encountered in the small catechism as part of confirmation teaching. And I had just never seen this list of rules as that life-giving or that encouraging before. And it's not just something we need to make sure we're not doing. And here's a cool connection. We would teach this to students. In the small catechism, it's the first part, which is right. We're going to begin with some rules and set it down right. And when we are teaching students, a lot of the times we're teaching at the beginning of the school year. So it's the fall, it's August, students are headed back to school. And one of the things we were able to do is to say, you know what, as you are headed out into a new year, and you remember that sense of how you get to sort of be a new person at the beginning of a school year, maybe with new clothes or a new backpack and maybe a new friend you made over the summer, there's a sense of newness. We would say to the students, also, look at these values that are not just written in Exodus 20. But what does it mean if you can go to school and try to be a student who encourages these things, to be a friend, to be an affirming presence in all the circles of influence in your life, living values like this? And it's important because we mention it around baptism. In our baptisms, we say, as parents and godparents and adults who come to baptism, we say, we will embrace these kinds of stories. The Lord's Prayer, the Creed, the 10 Commandments, they will be passed on and on and on. So I have a baptismal connection, and Jean Carter shared with me. On Tuesday at the Bible study, we were reading Exodus because we always read the upcoming lectionary passage. And of course, some of the conversation went to people's time learning the 10 Commandments or having to memorize them. And I was looking for stories about baptism and confirmation. And so Jean shared her story with me. Part of Jean's story is that her parents were not faithfully followers of religion or Lutheranism, but she would experience church when she'd go to her grandmother's house for visits and over the summer, right? To Omaha, Nebraska from California. And when Jean was 5 years old, she was baptized at St. Barnabas Episcopal Church. I did a little bit of research over the weekend, and I don't know if you know this. 3 years ago, an announcement came out. Did you catch an announcement 3 years ago? I read the news article. The title was, Former Anglican Church St. Barnabas Ready for New Chapter as Site of Catholic Worship. Yeah. Talk about always reforming. That was a group that has now joined the Catholic Church and is doing their thing. And I think that's pretty amazing and broad. So Jean was brought to baptism and encouraged in faith by her grandmother. And you told me you really cherish those times and you remember those times. And then when she'd go home to California, she and her sister would find a church to go to. And it wasn't a parent thing. It was just something they cared about. And in 7th grade, started at a Lutheran school, and then started at a Lutheran church in Hawthorne, California. Jean told me catechism was a pretty strict time. Can anyone testify to that? Any amens out there? Oh, Zoom, there's plenty of hands. Yeah, I'm sorry. I will lament with you if you need to grieve with me on that. Jean said she had to memorize the small catechism, but it was a little bit easier for her because she was in Lutheran school and Lutheran church, so she got it in 2 places and maybe it was soaking in a bit easier. But you still said when you were called to recite the stuff, your knees are shaking when the question is asked, what does this mean? That's the catechism question. But beyond all that, the hard questions, I just love to hear that you found youth group and church a place of positivity and good relationships and so many good memories for you. And it was reminding me about the life that I feel like the Ten Commandments are trying to lay out, like a good way to be that is healthy, life that is saying these virtues can sprout in you and be good for your friends and neighbors. And Exodus 20 is not just a list of what we better not do. And Jean, what a baptismal blessing from your grandmother to bring you to baptism and to be faithful, of which we're thankful, and thankful for your testimony to God's grace. It's hard sometimes when parents aren't leading the way, but I can see in your faith that you've said, God has still brought me on this journey and provided and made a way for me, and God paved the way for your faith and grace. Amen. So life in relationship. I mentioned baptism because I am happy to be together, and I am called by this Exodus reading to live in a covenant way as community. So let's take this beginning Sunday in worship again as a chance to begin in Lent and commit ourselves to God. What is your rhythm of life for Faith Lutheran Church and for our wider community, that we can be hands and feet of grace? And let it be a flourishing life. Show us the way to flourishing. And for us to be shown that, our word is remember your baptism. You're called today to renewal and promise. And here in that gospel story of Jesus, Jesus is drawing us closer to a life of compassion. And this morning, Jesus is also feeding us in community and with communion together. We are nourished for good. So come this morning, be fed for the journey and sent out. Amen.